halachic implications of bringing the terrorists to hospital in Israel to treat them. That worried me.
Yeah, that's worrying, but and that's a terribly important issue. Not only providing medical services, but there are all kinds of things which are done to support them. Now, one of your big problems in life is that you're frum.
Okay.
Yes, you want to follow the Torah derech.
Okay.
And that's, well, I have this idea in my head that politics and religion should be kept separate. If one mixes politics and religion, the result is rarely a good one. And as far as this issue is concerned, like every other political issue, it's complicated. Of course, everyone has his desires about how the society. Of course, and there has to be a lot of give and take, a lot of discussion, and a lot of compromise. No one is going to do everything they want out of a political decision. You want to get the best you can from your point of view, what you think is important. But as soon as religion gets mixed into it, then you become rigid, and no other possibility exists, and there's no room for compromise. We cannot discuss, and therefore the whole political system collapses. Bottom line, leave political decisions in the hands of politicians, and you exert your influence on the politicians who follow, whose path you want to follow. But we have to depend upon them to do their best to reach the best compromise for what we want.
Okay, so can I just ask you, let's pretend that I am the Prime Minister and President of Israel, and I come to Rabbi Fink and ask him, what do I do?
I say to Mr. Prime Minister, you are
Mrs.
Oh, well, at the moment, it's been a long time since Golda. I remember when Golda became the Prime Minister, the Prime Ministress, but back in those days, it was a big problem what to call her in Hebrew. The head of the government is called the Rosh HaMemshalah, which is masculine. And Rosh HaMemshalah, Golda Meir, it just didn't make sense. And it was a big problem, what to do, how to do that. And back then, in the days before neutral pronouns were invented, the only solution that people had, and the solution which everyone followed, was to call her Geveret Rosh HaMemshalah.
Okay.
And then you could say Geveret Rosh HaMemshalah Golda Meir, and it makes sense, even though she just Rosh HaMemshalah is masculine, but Geveret Rosh HaMemshalah. Now, of course, Geveret Rosh HaMemshalah could have another meaning. It could refer to the wife of the Rosh HaMemshalah. I remember in a previous Gilgul of mine, I was a faculty member in the Department of Oriental Studies in an American university. And this was back in the days when President Nixon was the first American.
When are you going to do this after this? Now you've got to.
And my Chinese.
How many are there now? 650.
Department of Oriental Studies.
The last 40 on you, right?
No, but I always do that.
I know, but
newspapers were full of discussions.
Question for me.
The American President Nixon. Only his
next time.
Sorry, Rav Fink. Can you mute? There's background noise from you.
I can't help it. I'm sorry. There's a meeting here.
You can't mute it?
Oh, okay. Yes, I can. You're right. Thank you.
So I think it's being taken care of. So in China, they wondered why President Nixon brought with him only the first lady, only his first lady on the visit to China. Why didn't he bring his other wives as well? So Geveret Rosh Hamemshala can be easily misunderstood as referred. And bottom line, I would say, dearest Prime Minister, you are faced with many tensions, people pushing this way, countries pushing that way. You have to find the best path for Am Yisrael. You have to find the best path for Eretz Yisrael, and you're not going to be able to get there by insisting on everything you want. You're going to have to make some compromises in order to get the best deal for Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, and how to work that compromise. You, Mr. Prime Minister, or Mrs. Prime Minister, you are the expert negotiator. You have a whole life behind you in politics, in doing these things, getting the best deal you can. Go for it. Do the best you can. That's what I would say. Tov, enough of politics. I just conclude by repeating what I said at the beginning. The result of mixing politics and religion is rarely good. Politics is politics, religion is religion, and the twain should not be mixed. So let's leave that aside. And before I begin talking about the topic I want to talk about today is taking 3 steps backwards after you finish your tefillah. It sounds like a crazy topic, but we're going to see that it turns out to be very important and very interesting. Before we come to that, let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature you wish to begin with. Okay, so I'm going to get the stuff on the screen. I think I did it. But I lost my chat. How do I get my chat? Well, I lost my chat. Let me get my chat back. Okay. Click. Okay, now I've got my chat back. So, we begin with the passage in the Gemara, which is simplicity itself. It says in the Gemara, Asur la'avor keneged hamispalalim. People who are davening, anyone who is davening, either in public in a tzibur, in the synagogue, or even in private at home, you're not allowed to walk in front of that person, not allowed to go in front of that person, run, walk, crawl, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to go in front of the person who's davening. That's all the Gemara has to say about it. Now, I know people who, if they finish their tefillah, they glance behind them and see whether or not anyone else behind is engaged in tefillah. And if so, they will stand in place, if necessary, for hours before taking 3 steps back, so as not to take steps in the direction of someone who is engaged in davening. Let's see what the poskim have to say about this. We begin with Rav Yitzchak Abuav. He was one of the greats in Tzfat, back in the heyday of Tzfat, back in the days when the Arizal was there and Rabbi Yosef Karo. He was one of that. He was one of that team. He writes, Diktek Mizeh Marmar, based on this Gemara that we just saw at the top of the page, he concluded, Im haya mispalel adam gamkein achrei mispalel, if someone is davening behind you, standing behind you in prayer, im asur lifsoa shalosh psiot ad sheyigmor she'achrav tefillah, can't take 3 steps back until the person behind you has finished his or her prayer. If you take your 3 steps back, you're guilty of walking in front of the person who's davening, and the Gemara just told us you're not allowed to do that. Tzarich l'dakdek b'zeh. You have to be very careful about this halacha. Rav Yitzchak Abuav wrote, Afilu ima acharon hitchil litpalel acharav. Even if when I started davening, there was no one behind me, and then someone snuck behind me and started davening after I already had begun, and well, I was first. You know, he came into my territory. I didn't go into his territory. I started davening first, and even though he just snuck in behind me, or she snuck in behind me, still I have to wait for him or her to finish davening before I can take 3 steps back. Kvar hitchil, if that person behind me already started davening, you cannot take 3 steps back. Now, this obviously creates a lot of problems. Obviously, well, what to do. Not only does it create a problem in taking 3 steps back, but just if you want to leave the synagogue for a moment, you want to go to the Sherutim, or you have to go home for some reason, you have to move from where you are standing. If there are people engaged in tefillah in the synagogue, well, how are you going to get to the door without walking in front of them? You can't. If the people who are davening are positioned in a way that you cannot get to the door without walking in front of them, so forget it. You can't get to the door. You just have to stand there until all those people finish davening. That is the conclusion of Rav Yitzchak Abuav. Now, he was a Sfaradi on the Ashkenaz side of the Pyrenees Mountains. The Orchis Chaim, that was he was from Narbonne, from southern France, what today is called Provence. He also says, Asur la'avor keneged hamispalim. He just quotes the words of the Gemara. Umina, and from this passage in the Gemara we learn, Im yekresh yispalel shumadam acharav. If it happens that anyone is standing behind you in prayer, Asur lifsoa shalosh psiot. You're not allowed to take your 3 steps back. Ad sheyigmor et she'acharav et tfilato, until the guy behind has finished his or her prayer. A guy is neutral. A guy can refer to a boy or a girl, right? I hope. I don't know. I use guy in a neutral way, referring to. Maybe I should revert to Middle English from the 13th and 14th century, where the word girl referred equally to male and female children. So we can use girl in a neutral way, reverting to Middle English usage. In any event, this prohibition of taking 3 steps back depends upon how far away the guy is behind you. Dafka betoch arba amos. If the guy behind you is very far away, more than 3 amot, and amma is from the elbow up to the top finger, approximately 46 centimeters is the standard measure for an amma. Everyone's arm is different, but 46 centimeters is the standard. So if the person is far away, more than arba amot, more than four cubits away, then it's okay to take 3 steps back. You're far away from him. Only if you're more distant, more than 4 amos, exactly 4 amos, you don't take 3 steps back. More than 4 amos, it's okay. So only if the person is near, is behind you, nearby. How close are we talking about? Almost 2 meters, 1 meter 80, 1 meter 90, approximately 2 meters is the distance we're talking about. If the person behind you is within 100 meter, 800 centimeters, approximately 2 meters, then you don't take your step back. Ad Kan, we've seen the opinions of the poskim who are very strict on this matter. The only room for leniency is if the person davening behind you is so far away, more than 2 meters, then going back is going to be okay. Not surprisingly, the Shulchan Aruch embraces this understanding of the Gemara. Of course, the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Gemara, but the Gemara is somewhat vague, could be understood different ways. It's this way of understanding the Gemara that Rabbi Yosef Karo embraced in the Shulchan Aruch. Asur la'avor keneged mispalim b'toch am amos. If you're within 4 amos, around 2 meters of the person who's davening, you're not allowed to go there, not allowed to walk there. Dafka lifneim, that's in front of the person who is davening. Within 4 amot, 4 cubits, 2 meters in front of the person who's davening, that's where you're not allowed to go. But the sides, mutter la'avor la'amod, you can walk on the sides of the people. That's no problem. Just in front, you're not allowed to go. Now we're beginning to get an idea here about the underlying reason for all of this. The Shulchan Aruch is making a distinction between walking in front of someone and walking next to someone. We're beginning to get a little feeling for the reason of the halacha. It's beginning to sound like it has to do with distracting the person. If you're within the person's field of vision, person looking forward, then walking in front of the person can be distracting. If you're on the sides, outside of the field of vision, well, no distraction at all. And the Shulchan Aruch says, Shulchan Aruch doesn't say this about distraction, but you're beginning to get a little sense that that might be what's going on here. Now we have a big kula, a big leniency. Im hishlim tfilato v'haya adam osek, adam acher osek me'acharav, asur lefsoa, shalosh pesiot ad sheyigmor misha acharav tfilato. You have to wait for the person behind you to finish davening. She'im ya'aseh hareze ka'over keneged hamispalel. Taking 3 steps back is in concept equivalent. Well, not only in concept, in fact, it's equivalent. It is walking in front of someone, and that's exactly what the Gemara said you're not allowed to do. You have to be very precise about this, even if the person davening behind you started davening after you already did. You positioned yourself in what you believe to be a safe location, where when you finished your tefillah, you'd be able to take 3 steps back. You positioned yourself in a place where there was no one davening behind you because you wanted to follow the halacha of the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch, and someone positioned herself behind you while you were in the middle of your tefillah. You finish your tefillah and glance back and you say, ruined, my plans are ruined. I tried to position myself in a place where this would not occur, and it happened. Well, now let's understand what's going on as the great poskim understand it, as the great mefarshim, the great commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. I don't know if the Mishnah Berurah is the greatest commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, but surely one of the most influential, if not the most influential commentary. He said, Asur lavor, when the Shulchan Aruch, just quoting the Gemara, said you're not allowed to go in front of someone who's davening, the reason is, and he says flat out, mipnei shemivatel kavanato al yedei zeh. If you go in front of someone who is davening, you will ruin that person's kavanah, that person's intent, concentration on tefillah. In simple English, you'll distract the person. Lachein, therefore, asur afilu osek as bekriyat shema. Therefore, even if you are dealing with kedusha matters, you're reciting Tehillim, you're saying Shema Yisrael, engaging in a kedusha activity is not a basis for leniency to distract someone else from his or her tefillah. Well, Mishnah Berurah has expressed quite clearly his opinion about the underlying basis of the whole halacha, distraction. And that's an important idea, because if the Mishnah Berurah is correct and has correctly explained the reason for the prohibition of going in front of him, distraction, then in a place and time where you're confident that you will not distract the person who's davening, no problem at all. Only where there's a risk of distracting the davener is there a problem. That could be, and we'll presently see, that is developed by some of the poskim into the basis of a lot of leniencies, which we're going to come to presently. But the Mishnah Berurah also quotes the Chayei Adam. Rav Danziger from the 19th century, from Lithuania. According to the Chayei Adam, the reason, the ta'am, the reason for the prohibition has nothing to do with distraction. According to the Chayei Adam, the reason for the prohibition of walking in front of someone who is davening, mipnei shemafsik bein mispalel lashchina. It's anyone who is engaged in the silent prayer, the Amidah, feet together, davening the Shmoneh Esrei. Anyone who is engaged in the tefillah is omed keneged hashchina. You're standing in the divine presence. That's why you stand silently with your feet together. Well, according to Chayei Adam, if the person who is engaged in silent prayer is standing in the presence of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, then of course you can't walk there. If the davener has a hologram of the divine presence in front of him, and you walk there, you're just walking through the hologram of the divine presence. Well, of course, that's just a nonsensical explanation. But if the divine presence is there, of course you cannot tread where. Of course you cannot tread where the divine presence is located. It has nothing to do with distracting the davener. It has to do with the kedusha of the space in front of the davener. The person who is engaged in davening, the space in front of him or the space in front of her has kedusha because the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is there. Well, you can't go there. You have to first go to the mikveh. You have to take your shoes off. It's just impossible to walk there. Two very different reasons for the prohibition of walking in front, of going in front of someone who is engaged in davening. Which is the reason we're going to embrace? Mishnah Berurah seems to embrace both reasons. But which is the reason that the Mishnah Berurah prefers? Notice the style. Notice the way the Mishnah Berurah presents the two opinions. The first opinion is presented anonymously, without any name associated with it. The second opinion, that you're interfering with the presence, the divine presence, is introduced with the name of the person who had it, the Chayei Adam, and together with the Vav at the beginning. Mishnah Berurah has a primary reason stated anonymously, but there is another opinion of one of the great rabbis, the Chayei Adam. Oh, from the style of presentation. But there is another opinion of one of the great rabbis. We understand that the Mishnah Berurah holds that the primary reason is distracting the person who's davening, but this other reason, we do not dismiss the other reason entirely. We would want to fulfill both reasons if we could, but if you can only fulfill one of them, The important reason is the first one, distraction. That's the approach of the Mishnah Berurah. For 17th century Poland, Rav Avram Gambiner was his name, but in the Yeshiva world, people don't even know his name was Rav Gambiner. He comments as follows. Shulchan Aruch says, "B'tzidehem, you're allowed to walk on the sides of the person. If the reason is the divine presence, well, the divine presence is in front of the person, not on the sides. If the reason is distraction, well, if the person doesn't see you, you're not going to distract the person. Shulchan Aruch said it's okay to walk on the sides of the person. Uvezohar, but in the Zohar HaKadosh, and remember that the Magen Avram, 17th century Poland, was the first, historically, the first great posek to systematically introduce Kabbalistic sources into halachic discourse. Prior to the Magen Avram in the 17th century, Kabbalah was Kabbalah, and halacha was halacha, and never the twain did meet. If one is engaged in halachic discourse, one relied solely on halachic sources, totally ignoring Kabbalistic sources. And the other way around, if one is engaged in Kabbalistic discourse, one would ignore halachic issues. Kabbalah was thought of, up until the times of the Magen Avram, Kabbalah was thought of as an area of wisdom, which teaches you about how the universe works. If you want to know how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, if you want to know how the stars, the celestial bodies work, if you want to know how the celestial bodies have influence upon events on this earth, if you want to understand the way mitzvot, performance of mitzvot interacts with events on this earth and influence events on this earth, the field of study you're looking for is Kabbalah. If, on the other hand, you want to know what is permitted and what is prohibited, if you want to know what you have to do, what you're not allowed to do, the area of study you're looking for is halacha, and until the Magen Avram of the 17th century, there was no intersection, there was no overlap between these two areas. Beginning with the Magen Avram, and we have a very clear example before us on the screen, Magen Avram systematically introduced Kabbalistic ideas from the Zohar Kadosh and from the writings of the Arizal. Those are his two principal sources. Those are the two principal sources of Kabbalistic ideas. He systematically introduced them into halachic discussion, and all of a sudden, the ideas of Kabbalah became prescriptive in people's minds, not only describing the universe, but prescribing how you should act in the universe. And not surprisingly, most of the poskim to this very day have followed in the path of the Magen Avram. There's still a few holdouts. The Kappa family is probably the most famous, but a number of other famous rabbis who also disregard Kabbalistic sources in halachic discourse. In any event, according to Kabbalistic sources, l'chol tzad aser, doesn't matter whether you're going in front of the person who's davening, or next to the person who's davening, or even behind the person who's davening, not allowed to walk, not allowed to go there at all, on any side, around where the person is davening. If you think about it for a moment, you will understand the approach of the Zohar. According to the Zohar Kodesh, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is not only in front of the person who is engaged in tefillah. The person who is davening is not only Keneged, not only in front of the divine presence, but the divine presence of the Shekhinah totally surrounds the person who is davening. And therefore, of course, you cannot go there, just as the Jews were not allowed to ascend on Har Sinai when the divine presence was there at the time of Matan Torah. Well, similarly, someone who's engaged in tefillah, the divine presence envelops the person who's davening. And so, of course, you cannot go there. The Olas Tamid, early 17th century, Posek, Eastern Europe. Haya Adam mitpalel acharav. If someone was standing behind you in prayer, near a pasha, it seems obvious. D'mayri betoch arba amos. We're talking about someone who's standing behind you, near to you, within arba amos, within 4 cubits, within around 2 meters. Or if your 3 steps will take you within 3 amos, then you cannot go there. This can be viewed either from the Kabbalistic point of view. The Shekhinah envelops the person who's davening, but it's not an infinite area. Rather, the Shekhinah envelops the person who's davening only to the extent of a radius of 4 amot, a radius of around 2 meters. From the Kabbalistic point of view, the Olas Tamid makes perfect sense. And similarly, from the distracting point of view, as long as you're far away, movement far away is not going to distract the person who's davening, but far away needs a definition. And since Rishut, since territorially in Halacha, 4 amos always defines a territory, so the poskim embrace 4 amot, around 2 meters, as the definition of the distance within which going is prohibited. One step further. The Mishnah Berurah also says, Kvar hitchil, even though you already started to daven, when that person snuck behind you and started davening right behind you, lo nikra ba b'gvulo. There's no basis for leniency in saying, oh, he entered or she entered my territory. When I started davening, that area was free and someone occupied it. Someone came into my territory after I said, sorry, no, that's not the way to look at it. Even if the guy behind you, even if the girl behind you is davening very, very long for hours, you still can't go backwards. It's the person who's taking three steps backward who is entering the territory of the person davening behind. And therefore, even if when I started davening, I thought I set myself up in a place where it would be clear to walk backwards, no good. The Eshel Avram, everyone loves the Eshel. I like the Eshel Avram. Oh, Eshel Avram from Buchach. He was a 19th century Hasidic posek, and naturally quite endeared within Hasidic communities, but even outside the Hasidic world, it is quite influential, extraordinarily influential. He wrote as follows: Ula yesh lomar degabe tahanun she'achar tefillah lo shayach zeh. He suggests a kula, and this is going to be the beginning of the basis of a vast leniency. He suggests there must be a difference between someone engaged in the Shemona Esrei, the silent prayer, as opposed to someone who has already finished the last bracha, the bracha of Shalom, Sim Shalom, already finished that, and is engaged now in the Tahanunim, which are after Shemona Esrei, Elokai Netzor L'Shani. Oh, the Tahanunim, which are added after the last bracha, that's not Shemona Esrei. Those are Tahanunim which are added in addition to the Shemona Esrei. Well, if the person is no longer in Shemona Esrei, then the problem of Shechina, divine presence, vanishes because the Shechina has already departed. And the problem of distraction also no longer applies because the person is no longer engaged in the silent prayer. Rather, that person is doing tahanunim, which are min hadin, optional. I know everyone does it, and if you have been doing it, you should do it, of course. But me'ikar hadin, all those tahanunim after Elokai Nitzor Lashoni are all optional. Most people indeed have the minhag to say them, but me'ikar hadin, they're optional and not part of Shmona Esrei. Kevan shekvar biyado la'akor raglav acharav, since the person standing behind me could halachically skip all of those tahanunim and immediately after the last bracha, sim shalom, could take 3 steps backwards. He could say that and take 3 steps backwards. Since he could take 3 steps backwards, he has halachically, or she has halachically finished the silent prayer, and therefore the Shekhinah has already departed, and there's no problem with distraction, just like there's no problem of distraction in walking in front of someone who is saying Tahanun. The problem of distraction is only Shmona Esrei, because that is what requires the ultimate in Kavana. That is what requires the ultimate in focusing attention. Now this idea suggested by the Eshel Avram, a great Hasidic rabbi of the early 19th century, this idea is now embraced by subsequent poskim. For example, Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan is really one of my favorites. I really like the Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan wrote as follows: Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein, the Rav Nevardik, at the very end of the 19th, very beginning of the 20th century. Im hishlim tefilato. You finished davening. V'haya adam acher mitpalel acharav. And after you finish your davening, you glance behind you, and you see someone else davening behind you. I thought I chose a place where that wouldn't happen, but someone positioned himself just behind me. Someone positioned herself just behind me while I was davening. You have to stand there for hours until the guy behind you finishes his or her prayer. Taking 3 steps backwards is going in front of the person davening and is simply prohibited. You have to be very careful about this. If the person started davening after you, you still cannot take 3 steps back. Okay, so far, the Aruch HaShulchan is just summarizing the halachas which flow out of the Gemara, as all the other commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch have done. And now, the Aruch HaShulchan, these are still the words of the Aruch HaShulchan, now he adds the new idea. Yera Eli, it seems to me, he expresses himself modestly, it seems to me that the following is correct, but he's not hedging. He's not hedging here. He's not being overly modest. No one told him he had to publish this idea. The very fact that he chose to publish it means this is his firmly held idea, his firmly held concept. He expresses himself in a modest way because it is his idea and not something which flows directly out of the Gemara. But here is the idea building on what the Eshel Avram taught us in the previous source. Im hamitpalel siyem kvar shmona esrei. If the person standing behind me has already finished the Shmona Esrei, but he or she is engaged in tachanunim and it's taking forever. There's no prohibition to go in front of that person. That person has finished sim shalom, And therefore, let him or her continue silently with tachanunim all day long if he or she wants, but there's no longer any prohibition to walk in front of that person. The prohibition to go in front of someone who's davening because you might distract that person has to do only with the Shmona Esrei up to the end of Sim Shalom and no further. And surely, if you have to go somewhere, you have to go to the Sheratim. For some reason, you want to leave the if for some reason you are pressed and have to take 3 steps backwards to end your tefillah, go for it. If the person behind you has finished Sim Shalom, how are you supposed to know whether the person behind you finished Sim Shalom or not? He or she is davening silently. How are you supposed to know where that person is holding in the tefillah? Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in the Halichas Shlomo, said as follows: Ima omed achar siyem kvar et tfilato, ach lo pasa adayin, mipnei shemamtin lemitpalel acharav. If I am standing in the front of the synagogue and someone is standing behind me silently with his or her feet together, and the reason the person behind me is standing silently with feet together is because someone behind him is davening. We have 3 people in a line. The guy in the back, the third person, is davening Shmona Esrei. In front of him is someone just standing there like a golem, waiting to take his 3 steps backwards. I'm in front of the person who's just standing there waiting to take 3 steps back. Nira shemuter lifsoa kenegdo. Of course I can take 3 steps back because I'm not taking 3 steps back in front of someone who's davening. I'm taking 3 steps back, and someone who finished davening is just waiting to take his or her 3 steps backwards. That's okay. Hu adin l'chol dvar mitzvah. If I have some mitzvah reason why I want to take 3 steps back, that's fine. Okay, now one other issue has to be discussed before we come to the big leniencies, which I've been alluding to since the beginning of the shiur, and that's the question of a cotton, a child, up to the age of bar or bas mitzvah. Cotton means up to the age of bar or bas mitzvah. From the age of bar or bas mitzvah, cotton becomes a gadol. Ketana becomes a gedola. Well, if we have a cotton davening behind me, what is the status of the tefillah of a cotton? Children up to the age of bar or bas mitzvah have some kind of obligation of chinuch. In another shiur, we could talk about whether the obligation of chinuch falls upon the child or whether it falls upon the parents to be mechanech, to educate the children exactly who is obligated by the mitzvah of chinuch. Is an interesting discussion, but not for now. But whatever is going on when the cotton is davening is no different than whatever is going on if the cotton lights Hanukkah candles or the cotton drinks 4 cups of grape juice in Leil HaSeder. Or if you're in France, if the cotton drinks 4 cups of wine in Leil HaSeder. In all of these cases, what's going on is chinuch, not pirsum hanes for Hanukkah, not pirsum hanes for Purim. Those are mitzvahs which can be fulfilled only by someone who has an obligation to fulfill mitzvahs, namely a gadol or a gedola. What the cotton is doing is habituating himself, accustoming herself to do mitzvahs so that he or she will do the mitzvahs correctly after bar or bas mitzvah. It isn't actually a tefillah, it's a practice for tefillah. It's a rehearsal. It's a practice for tefillah. So what is the status of a child who's davening behind me? Am I allowed to take 4 steps back where a child is davening or not? Well, the Eshel Avram, whom we mentioned earlier from Buchach, Odot she'ein la'avor lifnei omed b'tefillah, regarding this prohibition of walking in front of someone who is engaged in the silent prayer, nira delo shayach ze ki'im begadol. The prohibition is only to walk in front of a gadol, someone over the age of bar or bas mitzvah. That's tefillah. That's in the presence of the Shekhinah. Child, no. No, the child is only engaged in chinuch, מה שאין כן בקטן המספלל. הגם שעל הבל פיהם דתינוקos בדברים קדושים העולם עולם עומד, it's true that the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot teaches us that the world exists, the world continues to exist, only in the merit of the breath coming out of the mouths of children who are engaged in Torah and Kedusha. It's true that it is the children's engagement in Torah and Kedusha which sustains the universe. That's true. But lo shayach behem kivun alev. But the kavana, the focusing of intention, which is required for mitzvahs, that is something children are not qualified to do. Therefore, a mitzvah which requires kavana, writing a mezuzah, right? If a computer prints out a mezuzah, a printing machine, you print a mezuzah. It's not a mitzvah object at all. In order for the parchment with the writing on it to have the kedusha of a mezuzah, the person writing it has to have in mind that he or she is doing a mitzvah. We could talk about women being suffering on another time. But without the kavanas alev, there is no mitzvah being performed. And therefore, a child who writes a mezuzah has no kedusha at all. You cannot use it for the mitzvah. Of course, there are mitzvot which are dependent upon actions and not dependent upon kavana. For example, the Mishnah discusses the case of at the beach, at the sea or the ocean, where where steps have been built going down into the water, into the sea or the ocean. And if you want to go bathe in the ocean, in North American English, we don't distinguish between bathing and bathing. If you want to bathe in the ocean, you have to walk down the steps into the water. The Mishnah discusses the possibility of placing a kli, a utensil which requires immersion in a mikveh, placing it on a step and waiting for the tide to come in, and the waves will lap over the utensil, which requires immersion in the mikveh. The Mishnah said, that's fine. That's fine. You don't need kavana for immersion in the mikveh. You just need the facts to be correct. There are mitzvahs which do not require kavana, unlike mezuzah, which does require kavana. If a child immerses a utensil in a mikveh, that's fine as long as there is an adult observing to make sure that the facts are correct, that it was correctly immersed into the mikveh. If an adult is standing by and watching, it's okay if a child puts the utensil into the mikveh. It's also okay if a non-Jew puts it into the mikveh, as long as an adult Jewish person is observing to make sure the facts are correct. Mitzvahs like mikveh do not require kavana. Mitzvahs like mezuzah do, and tefillah clearly fall. There's no such thing as tefillah without kavana. The kavana is the ikar. Well, that's just about all there is in tefillah, is the kavana, and therefore children are not actually fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillah. Mufla samach leish, the Dara of Nivdakim, when a child approaches the age of bar or bas mitzvah, the ability to have halachic kavana begins as the child matures. Every child is different. Every child matures at a different rate. But a child which is approaching bar or bas mitzvah and makes a neder, makes a vow, well, if that's an older child approaching bar or bas mitzvah, it's quite possible that that child already understands what kavana is all about and had proper kavana in making the neder. You have to check out the child. You have to give the child an examination, test the child, and find out whether or not the child really understands what the kavana is of a neder. It is possible for children to have kavana as they mature and approach the age of bar or bas mitzvah. Kaimelan cotton ein lo machshava. But although a cotton up to the age of bar mitzvah might be able to develop kavana, any halacha which is dependent upon machshava, you need actual bar or bas mitzvah for. Bottom line, the Eshel Avram holds that if the person standing behind you is a minor, under age bar or bas mitzvah, no problem at all. Take 3 steps back. On the other hand, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in the Halacha Shlomo says, "Cotton ha'omed b'tefillah im lo higia lechinuch utar la'avod kenegdo." Problem at all. Im kvar higia lechinuch aser. Oh, since every child again matures at a different rate, when the parents are of the opinion that the child has reached the age where the child can have an understanding of this mitzvah or that mitzvah, that's the age where chinuch begins for this mitzvah or that mitzvah, the age in which the child begins to have understanding. Once the child has reached the age that he or she understands what tefillah is about, now there's an obligation either upon the child or upon the parents. This the post can disagree about, but there is some kind of obligation of chinuch to habituate, to accustom, to have the child begin practicing davening, and part of that is doing it correctly. Just like a child who has reached the age of chinuch for lighting Ner Hanukkah should do it correctly. Chinuch means lighting the ner correctly. There should be enough oil, or the candle should be long enough to burn, the proper length of time. It should be in a location, which is a correct location for fulfilling the mitzvah. Chinuch means, among other things, performing the mitzvah correctly. And therefore, if the child has reached the age of chinuch, that varies from child to child, depending upon how mature he or she is, then one of the halachas is people should not walk in front of that person. And since that's one of the halachas, the tefillah should be done correctly, and therefore you should not take 3 steps back if the child is old enough for chinuch in tefillah. That's all the background stuff. Now we're ready for the Tzitz Eliezer. Tzitz Eliezer of Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg. He says, most of the poskim hold that the reason for the prohibition is distraction. We saw 2 reasons. The divine presence, the Shekhinah, and we saw the distraction reason. As far as which reason is definitive, Mishnah Berurah indicated to us that the primary reason is distraction, and the Tzitz Eliezer has made, I didn't bother giving the lists, but he lists all the poskim who hold distraction and all the poskim who hold divine presence, and it's the distraction opinion which is by far the majority. Bizman hazeh rov mispalelim einam mechavnim. Nowadays, most people have no kavana at all when they daven. Nowadays, kavana is a fairly rare thing. Befrat hamamone ha'am hapshutim. Surely amongst the hoi polloi, the hoi polloi? I don't know, my English is so weak, right? hoi means the in Greek. Well, I guess if you can say the Beis Hamidrash, then you can say the hoi polloi. Okay, the hoi. uh, Most people don't have kavana. They daven as quick as they can and they go about their business. Well, if you're in a situation where it's reasonable to assume that the person behind you has no kavana anyway, so there's no problem in taking 3 steps back. And I found a good source for this idea in this sefer, Orches Chaim. He quotes one of the great Hasidic works, Lahamlitz ala mekilim bazeh bizman hazeh sherovam einam mekavnim. I found good sources for this idea in these Sfarim he quotes. Since most people have no kavana anyway when they daven, well, then you don't have to worry about distracting them. Further, the Marashdam wrote that the person who's standing behind you should be doing one of 2 things in his or her tefillah. Either the eyes should be closed, or the eyes should be focused on the siddur. That's what the person davening behind you is supposed to be doing. And if for some reason he or she is gazing forward and will see you walking there, well, the person doesn't have kavana, and therefore there's no reason to avoid walking in front of the person. Therefore, there's room for leniency in taking 3 steps back if someone is davening behind you. And this leaves us with the conclusion, what should you do if you finish your silent prayer and you glance behind you and you want to take 3 steps backwards and you see someone davening there? Well, do you have to stand there for hours and wait? Or if you're in a place where people are davening mincha in the lobby of the hotel and you want to walk in front of them to get to the main desk or to leave the hotel or to get to the sheikh's team, do you have to wait hours until they finish davening in order to walk there? No, you don't. Of course, it would be polite to wait a while. That would be polite. But when you run out of patience, there's great room for leniency in walking in front of the people. With this, I'm going to conclude the survey of the halachic sources. And I'm going to ask you whether you have any questions that you wish to pose at this time. All is well?
Shalom, Rav Fink.
Shalom.
Hi. As usual, I have a question or 2.
Okay.
I'm wondering, the chinuch part, was that because it miseducates the child? I want to understand if I caught it correctly. Because if I'm stepping back, it might be miseducating them. Is that why?
Yes. Well, among the halachas, among the chinuch, when you teach a child how to daven correctly, one of the many things you teach the child is you're not allowed to walk in front of people who are davening. And therefore, if you are educating the child, then you shouldn't walk in front of that child. You can't teach the child simultaneously. Don't
Thank you.
walk
I have,
and I do it.
say it again.
Rather like my father always used to teach me, when you get to the corner and you want to cross the street, wait until the little green man flashes, because any children who see you jaywalking will get the wrong message. It's not chinuch for the children who see you jaywalking. You want to teach the children to wait for the green man to light up. Okay. Any other issues?
Thank you.
You
Hi, Rav. Going back to the explanation of the Magen Avraham, the Kabbalistic explanation, where he says the Shekhinah is all around somebody who's davening in Amidah. So according to this, then if the 2 people davening together in shul, and one is actually started davening Amida, and the one next to him hasn't started yet, then if I'm the one that hasn't started yet, if I take 3 steps back now, I'm going to be I'm going to stepping into a Shekhinah. So then I can't daven my Amida now.
Correct. That is indeed the Kabbalistic point of view. According to this, everyone in shul should begin simultaneously. And indeed, in Kabbalistic shuls, that's what they attempt to do. Everyone begins simultaneously with the silent prayer.
Well, hopefully there are no latecomers.
Well, if you're davening in a Kabbalistic shul, you should not be a latecomer, right?
Yeah.
And I hope that my response in North American English is satisfactory. My strine is very weak.
I understand.
I think I have another question.
Yes.
You mentioned the presence of the Shekhinah leaving and staying. I understand that there's plenty of room for contradictory ideas. You had mentioned one time that at the end, after I'm past Elokai, or the Yularatzon, that I shouldn't skip in order to say Kaddish because I'm still in the presence of the Shekhinah. And then in this case, it would be that the Shekhinah had departed, so one could take steps. Is that finding the good side of each in order to, meaning like, is that basically like using the holding space for contradictory opinions, or and it's all correct? Or?
That's very insightful. Yes, that is insightful.
Thank
Good.
you.
Okay. So,
it's your teaching. Thank you.
I wish you a good week and a safe week, and good Shabbos, and look forward to seeing you all again next week. Until then, shalom.
Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat.
Shavua Tov.
Yes, Philip.
I'm going. Thank you very much.
Well, where are you physically located? You're in Israel?
No, I'm in Sydney, in the same place as Jody is.
Yes, you have the pronunciation of Dinky Diozzi.
Oh, I'm originally from South Africa.
Oh.
Yeah, well, I've been here for 40 years, so I probably picked it up.
Praat u ook in het Afrikaans?
A bitty.
Okay. Ik ook.
You're also from South Africa. Yes.
Tot ziens.
Okay.
Shalom.
Since.
Tot ziens.